Okay, so now that we know how to make a simple GET request with the Fetch API, I want to get into some of the options that you can pass into your request. And there's three that I really want to focus on in this video. There's the method, the headers, and the body options. Now, up to this point, we've only made GET requests because we haven't specified any other requests. The GET request is going to be the default. So if we want to make a post or a put or a delete request, then we have to specify that as the method in the options. Okay, so that's the first thing I want to look at. And then we have a headers option to send any custom HTTP headers that we want. So for example, to specify the type of data you're sending in a post request, you would add the content type header. And you can add custom headers as well. In fact, a lot of APIs have authentication where you would authenticate and then you'd have get some kind of token that you would then send in the headers to access protected pages or protected resources. And then the third one is the body. So if you have a form, let's say it's a recipe application and you want to add a new recipe, you would make a post request and you would most likely have the data come through the form and you would put it into the body of the request, all right, to get submitted to the database or whatever it is that your backend API does. Now, to test this stuff, I want to use an API that I've been using for well over a half a decade in many videos called JSON Placeholder. So it's at jasonplaceholder.typicode.com. And what it is, it's a fake API for testing and prototyping. And what it means by fake is that the data that we post or put or delete, it doesn't actually get changed in the database. It's just for testing. So it basically mocks what a real API would do in terms of the response that it gives us back and so on. Now, there is another product that this developer created called JSON Server, which you can download and run locally, and you can actually persist the data. So if you make a post request, it'll get saved. It'll actually get saved in a JSON file, which is kind of like a mock database. And we'll do that later on. But for now, I just want to use this. And there's some different resources that we can use. Posts, photos, to-dos, users. So you'll see if I click on this post, it actually makes a GET request to /posts, and it gives us, I believe it's 100 different posts with a title, a body, an ID, and a user ID. Okay, so it's just some mock data. You can see the text isn't even real text. It's just like lorem ipsum. Now, this type of API is called a REST API or a RESTful API. And I'm not going to get too deep into it, but a REST API has certain standards as far as the methods that you use, the HTTP methods, and the endpoints or the URLs. There's a certain structure to it that you follow to make it a REST API. And usually with a REST API, it has CRUD functionality, which is create, read, update, and delete. So in this case, we have methods and endpoints to create, read, update, and delete posts, or users or to-dos or whatever other resources are available. So to give you an example, you can make a GET request to /posts. Obviously, that would be prefixed with the domain. If you create your own API, then you'd have your own domain / whatever resource. But in this case, it'd be /posts. That would give us all the posts. If we make a GET request to post / and then a number, that number would be the ID of the post. So we can actually click on this, and you can see it gives us the post with the ID of 1 because I passed in a 1. If I do, let's say 4, it gives me the post with the ID of 4. All right. Now, as far as creating content or creating posts, we make a post request. I know it's a little confusing because these are both called post, but we'd make a post request to whatever resource. In this case, it's going to be blog posts, and that would create a new post, and you would send data along with this. We don't send data with a GET request in most cases, but with a post request, you're posting data to the server, so you would send data in the body. I'm going to show you how to do that in a few minutes. Now, to update data, in this case post, you'd make a put request or a patch request. And again, you would pass the ID and the URL because you need to know which post you're updating. And then to delete, you'd make a delete request and pass the ID in as well. Now, these methods and these endpoints all together, they give us CRUD functionality of post, create, read, update, and delete. And if you think of pretty much anything in any application, You have resources that have CRUD functionality. If you think of Facebook, when you make a Facebook post, you can create it, you can read it, you can update it, and you can delete it, right? And if you, let's say, submit a review to Google for a company, that review, you can create it, read, update, and delete. Sometimes you can't update, but it really depends on the resource and the website. But CRUD is at the core of most applications. It's usually CRUD and then authentication, because in many cases, obviously, you need to have an account and log in, and then your post or whatever it is connected to that account in a relational database. All right, so what I want to do now is make a post request and show you how we can add the options of the method, the body, and the headers. Okay, so let's create a function here, and we'll call this create post, and that's going to take in a post object. Okay, and then we want to make a fetch request, and we want to pass in the URI or the URL. So if we look here, we're making a post request, and we're going to make it to /post. Now notice the get request, we can also make that to /post, and they do two different things. This gets all the posts, this one creates one. And it's fine to have the same endpoint, the same URL, as long as the methods are different. So post is different than get, so they're going to do two different things. Okay, so let's grab the entire URL. Just click here and grab that. You can't just do /post because it won't know what the hell you're talking about. You need to put the domain as well. And then what we want to do is, in addition to that, because that will just make a get request, in addition to that, I'm going to pass in an object of options. And the first thing I want to add here is the method, and I'm going to specify that I want this to be a post request. And you don't have to do all caps, it's just a convention that I like to use. So that's the method post. Now when you make a post request, you're posting data to the server, so we need to add the data in the body. So let's say body, and we want to stringify this because this is going to be an object, a JavaScript object. We want to stringify it to a JSON string. So we're going to run it through json.stringify. And then in here, you could just pass in post like that, but I think it's better to specify the exact fields that are going in. So I'm just going to say, put an object here and say I want the title, and that's going to come from the post object title, and then the body, which is going to come from the post body. All right, now when it comes to the ID, because if we look at our posts, they have an ID as well and a user ID, but the user ID is optional. So is I think the title and body is as well. You don't have to put these in. It all depends on your back end. If you're checking your fields and saying, well, you need a title, then it'll throw an error and tell you that. But the ID is always, not always, but in most cases, the ID is going to be created automatically, and it's going to increment automatically. All right, so if you use a database like MySQL or Postgres or MongoDB, most of the time the ID is created automatically. All right, so you don't have to, like in here, when you make a post request, you don't have to specify an ID. The server does that for you, including this mock or fake REST API. All right, so we could simplify this a little more. Since this is going to be an object, we can destructure it. We learned about destructuring a little while ago, and we could just take out the title and the body of the post. And then down here, we could then take off the post dot because we're passing the title and body right in. And then since these are the same, body and then the variable of body, we don't even need this. We can just get rid of this and just do title and body. Okay, so that's the data we want to send. That would usually be put in a database. It's not going to be for this, but if it were your API that you built with whatever, Node.js, Python, PHP, any language, then you would most likely store this in a database. Now, the last option I want to add is headers. So in HTTP, we can send headers. So for instance, the content type of the data we're sending. So inside quotes here, I'm going to say content-type. And I'm using quotes because there's a hyphen. So let's say content type, and then the type for JSON is going to be application/JSON. Now I could send anything I want. I could send a header called hello and set it to a string of world. In many cases, you'll send a token. So you'd authenticate with the API somehow. You'd send some login data or whatever. And if it passes, you'd get a token sent back. And then you'd store that token in like local storage or something. And you'd send that token with your request, and then the server could validate who you are and what you can access, what pages or what resources you can access. So we'll just send a fake token of ABC123. We'll get rid of this hello world thing. Okay, so that's the request that I want to send. Now it's still going to return a promise the same way. So we're going to say .then, and then our response object, we want to return res.json, and then we'll have another .then, and that will have the data that it gives back to us. Now, in most cases, just console log this. In most cases, what you'll get back from a post request is the newly created resource or item, in this case, a blog post. You'll usually get that back, including the ID that was created on the server. So let's go ahead and save that, and actually let's run it. So we want to say create post, and we're going to pass in an object that has a title. For title, let's just say my post, and it's going to have a body, and I'll just say this is my post. Okay, so we'll save that and we'll run it, and let's see what we get back in the console. So we get back an object with the title and body that we sent, and also the ID. Okay, so this gets sent to the server, and the server sent this back to us in a promise. Okay, and the ID is 101 because if we look at the posts and we go all the way down, the last one has the ID of 100. Now the thing with this, with JSON placeholder, is whenever you make a post request, even if I make another one, it's always going to be 101 because it doesn't actually get added to the database. These are stored in the database on JSON placeholder server. It doesn't just let anyone add to the database. So it's just a mock or fake API. So it doesn't save the data, but it sends us a response as if it were a real API. Okay, so just keep that in mind, that it'll always be 101 when you make a post request, and it doesn't actually get added to the database. But this is exactly how you would send a request to your own backend API. Now the last thing I want to show you is the network tab. So we looked at this a little bit before, but I'm just going to reload the page, and you'll see our request down here to posts. And the status is 201. Now, if you remember, the 200 range means successful, and the 201 status, that specific status means created. And that's why we got this, is because we sent a post request and we created a new blog post. So we get a 201 back. Now, if I click on that request, we're going to see the headers. Now, when it comes to the headers, there's response and request headers. Response comes from the server. Okay, request is what we did. So if we come down to request headers, we're going to see the content type that we sent, which was application JSON, and we should see our token. So it's in alphabetical order. So if we come down here to T, you'll see our token, and that's ABC123. So the server could then use this and authenticate us. Okay, and again, the server could be anything. It could be Node.js with Express. It could be Python with Django. Usually it's going to be some kind of framework that handles REST APIs. All right, so let's see. We can also view the response itself, which is just the data. That's the response. We can preview that. And then the payload is the data that we sent, which is the title and the body. Notice the ID isn't here because this represents our payload. Okay, when you send a bundle of data to the server, that's known as a payload. All right, so I think that's pretty much what I wanted to get to in this video. In the next video, I want to do another little mini project, and I want to still use this JSON placeholder. This time we're going to use to-dos, which have a ID, title, user ID, and a completed value, which is going to be a Boolean, either true or false. And I want to show you how we can get them. We can make a post request, create them, we can update them, and delete them. And we're also going to have a little bit of UI action deal with the DOM a little bit.